Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode. So today we're going to be talking about, for the first topic, the stabbing of Iryna Zarutska, the Ukrainian girl, or Ukrainian 23-year-old woman who was stabbed to death by a black career criminal on the Charlotte light rail system last week. And we got two questions from this, one from KMax and another from Sharecrop. They were both wondering about the question of whether we can keep these type of criminals locked up, because the black guy who did it, he has been arrested several times and even been convicted of multiple felonies, yet he's still wandering around. He's homeless and he's clearly got severe mental illness issues, yet he's allowed to wander and do as he pleases in society. So we'll talk about that angle and other angles with it. On the matter of whether we can, bring back three strikes laws or anything, this is up to states and cities to actually keep these people out. And a big reason that a lot of these people are able to kept out is that blue cities have gone very lenient on criminals. And over the last decade, starting in the 2010s, is that we've had criminal justice reform and we've turned against mass incarceration and we've wanted to let these people out. That's why we've eliminated cash bail and allowed it easier for these criminals to roam about and do as they please. And there is the matter that North Carolina can, if this becomes a major political issue within North Carolina state legislature, that they can utilize this to say we need to have something like a three strikes law or some type of system that ensures that people with this much of a lengthy of a criminal rap sheet is kept in jail for effectively for life. Something like the three strikes law where, if you committed three serious offenses, I forget if it was, I think it had to be three felonies, but it's three serious offenses and pretty much after the third you are locked up for good. There was a huge backlash against it and turning against it. Laws like that, like in the 2010s, and then we moved to in a different direction. Now we're wanting to move back to that. So it's up to the states to pass these laws. North Carolina has a Democratic governor, but they do have a Republican legislature. This is something that the Democratic governor could see as something he wants to do to burnish his moderate credentials in a conservative state. So there's a possibility that North Carolina to take this and do something with it. Now, nationwide, probably not. And some people are like, well, we need to have Congress to do that. Well, that only pertains to federal laws. And most of these crimes happen on the state and local level. It's not going to be a federal crime for this. I mean, federal crimes are pretty stringent on these matters. But when it comes to, say, murders and rapes and other things that are handled by local authorities, that's generally outside of the federal government's jurisdiction. We can pass, you can utilize the DOJ to pressure these cities to pass stricter enforcement of the laws, by withholding funding or resources of some sort. You can probably exert some type of pressure on them to do more to keep these criminals out of jail, but it's up to state legislatures and city governments to do their job and to pass and enforce strict laws on these matters to keep people like DeCarlos Brown Jr. out of keep him out of jail, actually, to keep him in jail. It's up to them. So I think you could see this in red states. I don't think that there's enough push in blue states to do this. There has been in New York, there's been pushback against the elimination of cash bail and some of the other metrics. Keeping certain, bringing back the three strikes law in blue states, I don't see quite happening. One is that crime has become politicized. It's become a partisan issue in a way that it wasn't in the 90s. And really, if you care about crime, you are a Republican. Now, some moderate Democrats who are running in city governments will say that they care about city crime, and they're not as full on defund the police, allow criminals to do as they please as they were in 2021. You can even see that change with Mamdani, which even though Mamdani is the soft on crime candidate for certain. He is definitely the soft on crime candidate. He is running away from defund the police. And they're running away from a lot of these ideas that allow crime to fester and blow up following the George Floyd revolution. They've worked to moderate that. But in terms of the really strict stuff that we implemented in the 90s, which was in response to the high crime rates of the 80s and 90s that both Democrats and Republicans acknowledge, and some of the biggest advocates for these stricter measures were black advocacy groups, is that the people demanding the Bill Clinton crime bill that was later turned into this racist legislation in the 90s were black advocacy groups. And a lot of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus were fervent supporters of it because they realized that this would take their worst elements out of their community and put them in jail. And then 20 years later, they changed their mind on it. You don't have that type of bipartisan consensus on crime. It's more the bipartisan consensus is we're not defunding police. We're eliminating cash bail is probably not a wise measure. We probably need penalties for serious shoplifting, which, I mean, California and all these states, they had like these ridiculous laws that you could steal upwards of like $1,000 worth of shit and you would not be charged with anything, or you'd only be charged with like a civil offense, and it would be a very mild misdemeanor, which then allowed all the shoplifting and other things that to blow up. But they kind of they realize that stuff. But in terms of keeping these guys locked up forever, there's a much more of a skittishness among Democrats for that. They don't want to go that far. They simply just, the really outrageous stuff they've backed away from. And no Democrat, even the most left-wing one, the most progressive, the most soft on crime candidates like Mamdani, have to run away from defund the police. And so it's more measures like that. But their policies will still allow people like DeCarlos Brown Jr. to walk around. So you just don't have the bipartisan consensus for it, for blue states to pass these type of laws and to do measures at the federal level. On the federal level, whatever Republicans would propose, probably Democrats would oppose. So I don't see that that's... I think red states could make it much harder. I think, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, Louisiana, all these states will pass. I could see them starting to pass stricter crime enforcement, because crime has now become a major Republican issue. They're all wanting the National Guard to go into to dangerous cities, which would be smart for Trump, to go into Memphis, New Orleans, Houston, St. Louis, cities where they're located in red states, where the governor and Republican leadership would welcome them. New Orleans, or Louisiana's state leadership, is unlike other state leaders, and blue states is welcoming Trump bringing those type of resources there. And it would be an easy win for them to pass laws, something similar like three strikes laws, or something that keeps repeat offenders in jail for effectively for life, for a very long time. I think something like that you could see that pass in red states, but I don't see that passing in blue states. I don't think California is going to return to its old 90s laws that brought down crime, but then were brought down accusations of racism. California actually still has a three strikes law. It's just that it's a matter of they've reformed it, and I think they've allowed a lot more leeway for judges to move around it, and also that it has to be a serious violent offense. So pretty much you have to be like rape or murder to have it. And hopefully after two felonies and your third felony is a murder, you would stay in jail for life. But they've upped the standards to where, in the past it could have just been a felony. That's not considered so serious, and it was much more stricter about like judges. You have to put them in. You have to put these guys in jail, but maybe that's not the case now. It's also a matter of local authorities, because they could just see this as, the guy's charged with a felony, then he pleads down to a misdemeanor, and he's not, and these habitual offender laws don't apply to him. So I still say, yeah, red states could strengthen it. Some of these red states still have these laws on their books, but they could try to do this. I think it's that one thing with the crime thing is we still don't have crime to the level of public recognition or public concern that it was in the 90s. Yes, a lot of these cities are juking the numbers and making it seem a lot better. As we've seen with a lot of the investigative reporting on DC, they've been figuring out how to get violent crime to look like it's going down by messing with the numbers. They've even tried to do that with murders, which is much harder because it's like this guy got shot. This is an accident. Much harder to classify that as an accident. Homicides are generally the best barometer for assessing violent crime, which you could see this in the early 2020s where they're like, oh, well, violent crime is down except for murders. And it's like, well, I think the violent crime is up and murders reflect that. You're just figuring out how to manipulate the data to solve it, but you can't. It's harder to do that with homicide. But even in DC, there was a few cases where they had manipulated the data, but it's much harder to do so with that. With assaults and robberies and other things, it's a lot easier to say that that's not a violent crime or felony violent crime, and to make the stats look better. But it's much harder to do that with murder. But crime is not nearly the level it was in the early 90s. It's also not as an issue as much as a lot of people have to deal with. If you're someone in the suburbs, you're not really dealing with crime in a way that you would have in the 80s and 90s. It's just not. You have problems with petty crime and these quality of life crimes in these cities, but you don't. It's really not as horrific as it was in the early 90s, where we were just seeing outrageous murder homicide rate. Our homicide rate in the country might hit a new record this year, which that doesn't mean our cities are much safer, because we have all these petty quality of life crimes and other things, and also just random murders like this, that you're sitting in the wrong seat on this train and you get stabbed in the neck. You get stabbed to death. So, what's happening with that? That's still a concern to people, but it's, as I said, it's much more partisan issue, which in the 90s it was bipartisan consensus was around it. There's not a bipartisan consensus except for the wokest ideas they're moving away from. Now, on some other matters with this case is that there was a tweet about how walkable dense city or densible walk cities and walkable dense cities, and how we can't really operate them in America. Well, it's especially true with the South. This happened in Charlotte, which is one of the few southern cities with a light rail system or a metro system. Most of the South does not have this. Like Nashville, despite blowing up, has very little public transportation. I think they have buses, but no one really takes the buses. They do not have a rail system at all. Most of the South does not invest in this because of stuff like this. And also, people in the suburbs know that will bring out the magical elements from the cities to their burbs, and they don't want that. And also, everyone in the South prefers to drive because of this is how they interpret public transportation, is that it's for the people they don't want to be around. So the South does not want to invest in, walkable dense cities, because they view it as allowing the magic to blow up, allowing the magic to do as they please. So they don't want to do this in the type of South. And this is something very unique to the South. I mean, yeah, you can have these criminal incidents in the North, but the North generally develop more public transportation. You can live in a lot of northern cities and elsewhere without having a car. Living in the South without a car is was pretty much impossible. And a big reason why we have this is because of blacks. I mean, the reason why we're never going to have the type of cities that Europe has, which people are like, well, we'll just move them out. I mean, a lot of them are moving out anyway, but you still have a lot of issues with this. And Europeans, they operate in a way that it's like they're European cities. They use public transportation. They walk around. They go, oh, this is a cheap neighborhood. It must be nice, because, in Europe, it's just like a working class area. I mean, there could be a no-go zone, but even the no-go zones in Europe are nowhere near as bad as the black ghettos, which There was all these funny articles from the mid 2010s where they're like, they're complaining about Islamic no-go zones, but I feel a lot safer here than in Baltimore. And it's like, well, imagine that. Wonder why. And they don't connect the dots there. But, that's like something that it's like one of those nice things we can have. And even with crime going down and, murder rates going down, we're still going to have that aspect that you're trying to avoid magic in life. And a lot of America's social structure and a lot of the new American dream is trying to find a location where you minimize your interactions with magic Americans. And that's why everyone goes out to the suburbs. That's why people don't build in within the city. It's why people don't want to raise a family within the city, because they know what the city schools are going to be like, and the problem, the trouble and dangers that might pose their children walking to and from school. That's why they live out in the suburbs. That's why we like all this, some of the atomization that we have in American society that's caused by that. So we'll never have that. And any plan to do that, the people who are the most into like urbanism and stuff are also the most libtarded, and they're like, well, maybe they just need a Whole Foods and they get, they just think that like stuff, that they'll enjoy this at all. They don't take into racial demographics, and they just think that we can have these type of cities when our cities were built up in response to, well, they always complain about like highways and car access. It's like, okay, that's one factor, but the second factor is once the civil rights revolution happened and blacks were allowed to have a lot more power and to do as they please in these cities, that made whites leave the cities and go to the suburbs. And that's how our cities are now built around, is they're built around these highways and interstates so people can drive there for work. And people want like, well, we need to return it to how they were pre that. Well, you're going to have to eliminate a lot of the things that have happened over the last 80 years to do that. And that's just not going to happen, or not happen to an extent to have our cities act like Europe. So most of the urbanism and new urbanism, or whatever they want to call it, is generally a fantasy because they don't take into account the demographics that make these good ideas possible. They make these nice ideas possible. And going on to the factor, the reason why this is such a major news story is the fact that this is a Ukrainian refugee fleeing a war zone, and then she gets murdered. And there's been a lot of stories like this where Ukrainians come here to the United States, or go west into Europe. There's been a lot of rapes and murders of Ukrainian refugees in Europe, is that they go there and it turns out to be more dangerous than the war zone. And if you're living in like a city like Lviv or something, I was like, it's pretty safe there. And also, they're just not aware of this. Like, if you talk to Europeans coming here, they're not aware of the demographic matter and how our cities are. They approach our cities like they do their own cities. And when they even see the high crime rates, they're not aware of who's doing the crime. They think it's like cowboys and rednecks and stuff. They're not aware that pretty much 90% of violent crime is committed by minorities. Which I think that is like 100% the case, because, when you look at murder rates, I found like old FBI data, they always say, it's 13 deaths, 50, but like the newer data was showing it's like 60. And that's only the murders where they have an offender. The majority of murders that are not solved are committed within the black community. It's like a drive-by shooting and no one tells them who did the drive-by. That type of stuff. Majority of crimes that are solved, pretty much every crime solved that happens within a white community, it's solved because whites will go and like, oh yeah, that I saw Tom driving down the street and enter the home. He must have had something to do with this. They'll tell police, they'll cooperate with police, and it'll also be so shocking and so rare that, there'll be more attention to solving it. But with black community, that the community will resist even giving any information about it, and it makes it unlikely to be solved. So they generally commit much more than 50% of the murders. And then a lot of the murders that are attributed to whites, as we've been seeing with a lot of these mugshots, where it's like Enrique, Gonzalez, and he's like very dark brown, and they list him as white. Is that a big reason why? So I would say it's like 90%. But they're just not aware of this, and they're not aware that this is how a lot of our cities operate, and they become horrified as a result. And depending on how libtarded they are, their eyes are blind to it. And I think with this Ukrainian girl, is that most whites would have tried not to sit there, even though I could see, if it's like a packed train and this is the one place, and there's a lot of people on it. There's a lot of people on it, so she's like, okay, there's maybe nothing to worry about. There's like, hobo on there. This is normal, but it's something that's like learned within white Americans, and no longer, and even with the amount of propaganda, it's like, oh, I always treat them nicely or whatever. The average white American, if they see a bunch of black teens walking down the street, they'll cross the street. It's like the same that they, if they're next to a bad school, they'll move to a good school area. There's these unstated behavior, unexplicated behavior that we do, and we'll just say, oh, it's like bad schools or it's a bad neighborhood. We use all these euphemisms, but generally they understand what that means. They still might vote Democrat or whatever, but in practice, they operate in a different manner. And that's just something, and we don't tell people this. So Europeans and foreigners who come here are not aware of this, because no one's going to tell them that. It's just something you learn by living in America and what to do, and we just don't tell people. It's like people are like, we need to have our own talk. Whites generally know what to do, like intrinsically. They just don't like to talk about it. That's something that happens. But there's that. The last thing I want to say about it is the social media reaction. It's something I've always talked about, is that the new media environment favors right-wing views. And it's no better example than how X reacted to this murder. Is that all weekend, everyone was posting that image of DeCarlos Brown going in to stab Zarutska. Now, it got a little repetitive. And also there was this demand that everyone had to say the more over-the-top thing. And it's like Matt Walsh is like, he's got his own execution plan for this guy. Then another influencer is like, it's even a more elaborate execution. Like, it's like, oh, no, we shouldn't hang him. We should hang, draw, and quarter him and all this stuff. And it gets a little annoying, but it's generally good that that people are continuing to talk about this, because we get annoyed by this, and it makes for repetitive content if you're scrolling all day. But this is how we break through into the media, is if something becomes so huge and we keep repeating it, is that it then gets covered by the mainstream media, and Fox News began covering it, and Elon Musk is like all over it, and it became a news topic and politicians, national politicians, Trump and others, Stephen Miller, many other Republican congressmen are talking about this and sharing this issue, and then it becomes a major media item, and it's something that we're now going to discuss about. Look at these soft on crime policies that lead to people getting killed. And why do we have these policies? And so you have to highlight that through the internet. And this is a completely different media environment than we had 10 years ago. This would have never been even a thing on social media in 2015. But now these stories that would have been otherwise ignored, such as the Carmelo Anthony stabbing, and this, now become major national news because of the internet. And so that's a positive development. Even though I think that with this stabbing, that, when Ian Miles Chong is tweeting something about something incessantly, you do have to have some reservations about that. And it does create, I don't want to say bad content, but it gets, content overflow for, the average user, and that everyone's rushing towards it. And there's something, I tweeted about it like 2 or 3 times. I don't like to tweet that much on the weekends unless I'm really inspired by a topic. And I like to go about and do other things, recharge for the week. But, they're all discussing this and all obsessed on it. And there is a fact that you're just like, oh man, maybe this is a little bit over too much, but it's generally for the positive thing of a propaganda view of getting the right wing view out there. And now there is more consideration for black on white crime than there would have been years ago. I would say if, some people were bringing up the Knoxville Horror, and the Knoxville Horror was this terrible case from 2007 where this white couple was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by these blacks in Knoxville. It's a really horrific case. That's why it's called the Knoxville Horror, obviously. And it became a news story just because, but it was often condemned because it's like, oh, well, this is bad, but we're going to let the criminal justice system take care of it. And you should not have racist views about this. If the Knoxville Horror happened today, that's all Twitter would talk about, and there'd be a lot more acknowledgement of it. You would have several Republican politicians talking about it and wanting some type of national or state action to it in response to it, rather than just like, well, there's everything hunky-dory here, just let the criminal justice system handle this. Something like that happened today, it would be, the internet would force it to be the top news story of that week, or one of the top news stories of that week, depending on what else is going on in the country. And you just don't see, and that is one of the powers of the new media environment and the new internet that we have, where we now have a greater degree of free speech than we did even in pre-2016 or pre-2017 rather. And it's generally more likely to go viral, which we had a lot of free speech in 2014, 2015, but no one was paying attention to this. And it was all libtard content that was going viral. Now, flash forward a decade later, now it's all our content going viral, and we're also reaching far more people on Reels and TikTok and YouTube Shorts and YouTube in general. Probably less so with YouTube, but certainly so with X. So that is a testament to the new media environment. So we're now going to move on to other topics today. K-Max has other questions. He asked a question about Katrina, and he's like, oh, what do you think about this conspiracy theory? I mean, he sent this question probably after listening to the mailbag last week where I said I'm going to do a Katrina podcast. And for some reason, he's like, I need to ask a Katrina question. But we addressed that in the IQ supplement last week. He said something about Spike Lee blowing up the levees. I talk about that in the IQ supplement last week. So if you like to listen to that answer, tune in to the IQ supplement from last week. He asked about the 9/11 attacks 24th anniversary, about the results of that. I'll give a brief answer. If anybody wants to ask like these questions for the mailbag, where it'll be a day before 9/11, I can do that. Actually, I'm probably just going to save this for the mailbag itself and just highlight his other question. We're just going to save that for the mailbag because that's like a big topic, and that probably I'd like to be the primary topic for the mailbag. So I'm just going to save that for the mailbag, unless there's some other news that breaks Monday or Tuesday that puts it away, but I'll just address that for the mailbag. He has another question saying, Carol Swain wrote a book back in 2002 entitled The New White Nationalism in America. It's challenge to integration. In the book, she theorizes white nationalists will grow and strengthen due to white Americans aggrieved over racial double standards, race-based affirmative actions, high black on white crime rates, and liberal immigration policies. How correct was this book in retrospect to what we see today? I'm not sure if you've read it, but if you have, do you recommend it? I remember people read it and they thought it was kind of not the greatest book. She talks a lot with Jared Taylor and stuff, but I don't know. It's probably somewhat interesting. Whether it happened, it's not really white nationalism. It's more, white nationalism has grown like the traditional. The way I describe white nationalism is that it's more white separatists, is that you want your own white exclusive state. And there's far more white nationalists now than there was 20 years ago when the book was written. At the same time, it's that white nationalists are taking a backseat to the general right-wing developments, which is more of something that you could say is multiracial nativism, I don't like to use the term multiracial populism, but it's primarily white-based, but it's not quite white nationalism. It's identity oriented, but not calling for a separate ethno state. And it's more in response to immigration policies and DEI, which I guess you could say race-based affirmative action policies, because these are now, but they've now been expanded and much more common and much more directly impacting people. They're in a company and their company says, we need to diversify our management, and they pass you over for promotion and hire a less qualified minority for that. And I think that's primarily supported a lot of the Trumpism. So in a lot of ways, if you used a different term from white nationalism, if you said identity-based conservatism or identitarian conservatism, I think that would be correct. Probably less due to crime, and it's less due to the black-white dynamic. I would have to see how this is, but a huge thing about racial matters is that the black-white dynamic that impacted and shaped American history is weakening, because we now are, and it's changing due to the fact that we now have these millions of others that don't really quite fit in the black-white dynamic, and they create a whole new dynamic. And there's a lot of concern about that, and that's driving a lot of the push for immigration restriction and the concern for immigration among Republican voters and all these types of matters, and also the DEI stuff. DEI is shaped within the black-white dynamic, but it's also incorporating Hispanics and Asians into it as well, which is a new framework that's probably a little bit different than Carol Swain is. So, yeah, I think using a different term, I think it is, but it's also managing to include a lot of other, it's primarily majority white Americans, but it's also beginning to include a lot of other groups of people that are upset with liberal immigration policies and DEI. So, yeah, there's a point there. Sharecrop, he has a funny question. He says, "Please don't make fun of me." I have a tweet where there's all this concern about the first ad hits, where they're now doing full ads on NFL Red Zone, where in the past they would just have blinker, but now they're just having full ads during it, so it's interrupting NFL Red Zone broadcasts. And this tweet is like, the first ad has hit NFL Red Zone. 17 years of commercial-free football down the drain. And I say that a day that will forever live in infamy. And Sharecrop asks, but can you clarify what you're saying here? Are you just mocking people who think this ad change will be catastrophic to their quality of life? I'm just making a joke. I have these jokes. We're not anti-NFL anymore. I used to have these jokes in 2022 because there was a lot of right-wingers at the time who were like, this is a sign of the revolution and other things. And so I began mocking it. I still do the mockery to a bit, but it's more good-natured. I'm not telling people to not watch the NFL. I watched a little bit of the NFL this weekend. So it's just making a joke. I think it is something that it's worth remembering. This type of stuff, of what gets normies really upset, is that we think that it's the stuff like Iryna Zarutska, which I think it's now more people are, because they're getting aware of either through Facebook or TikTok or Reels, the more normie social media, and they will get upset about that. But a lot of normies, when the thing that really gets them worked up is something like this. Is something like ads like that, and so it's worth keeping in mind. But it's just a joke. That's all it is. I sort of am mocking, but it's lighthearted mocking. It's just more of a joke, a good-natured joke. That's all it is. We'll go to Gillis Enjoyer. He's got two questions. He said, what are your thoughts on the so-called AI race against China? Some more establishment figures seem to frame it as this generation's nuclear arms race against the Soviet Union, and that whoever loses will lose superpower status, while some and on say it doesn't matter and it is a distraction. What is the goal of this race here, and how will it determine the great power competition if it does at all? Well, I mean, AI is the new technological frontier, and if you fall behind, you're gonna have a distinct disadvantage. That's why when China, they had their own AI product that seemed to be better than some of our AI products, and it was like people were really concerned about it. It seemed to be a little bit overblown, some of its effectiveness, but there is this deep concern is that they're going to have this major technological advantage over us, and that will be able to shape their defense capabilities and their ability and even their economic power. So, I mean, it is important. I mean, AI could turn out to be not what it claims to be. It could maybe be limited in how much it shapes society, but it's already starting to shape our society. So a lot of these entry level jobs are being eliminated due to AI, and that's causing a lot of the unemployment among recent college grads. So are making it a lot harder to find jobs is due to AI, and AI is just shaping how we get information. Everyone's asking Grok for things or asking ChatGPT for questions to things. People are relying on it to write papers in college. AI is already making huge changes. I don't think, and so it's definitely going to shape how we conduct war in the future. And it's a technological advantage you want to have. So I don't think it's a distraction. There may be other factors that have proved more important, but right now it's like we don't want to say, well, it's not going to matter, and then China advances past us, and then they're able to become the global hegemon due to their advantage over AI. So I think it will I think it will play a factor in great power competition, but there's other factors in play as well. And you don't want to lose that advantage. It might not turn out to be as serious an advantage as we might think, but you don't want to wager that bet. Second question, it seems the mainstream argument for immigration in the West right now is that without it, the population will decline and the welfare state will go unfunded. What do you think the most effective argument against this is? My view is that we should frame it as that some temporary fiscal reforms such as taxing AI productivity can manage this until the older generations pass away and the population pyramid is rebalanced versus the permanent social upheaval caused by mass immigration and demographic change. Well, it's going to take a long time for the population pyramid to rebalance. It's going to take like 40, 50 years probably, maybe even longer, depending. Zoomers have fewer kids than millennials. It's going to be a major problem. I mean, the best argument is that a lot of these immigrants aren't paying into the welfare state. They're taking from the welfare state. This is especially true in Europe, where these migrants don't come even to work. They come to live off the welfare state. So they're taking away more from it than they're putting in. And that's even starting to be the case in America, where a lot of these illegal immigrants who came under Biden were coming for the welfare state. They were not coming to do the jobs that Americans won't do. They went straight to these liberal cities that offer generous benefits for them, and they lived off the taxpayers rather than contributing. And they don't even contribute that much in taxes because they earn tiddlywinks. They pay sales tax. Great, but that's not enough to offset the free benefits they're getting in terms of healthcare, education, sometimes free housing or subsidized housing and other things. So they prove to be a burden on the welfare state rather than adding to it. Now, one thing that they do add is not so much the welfare state, is that they do contribute to the consumer economy and to the economic growth, which then you can say, well, that provides more income to keep funding the welfare state through means greater profits for these companies, so we're able to tax them more or whatever. You can make that argument, but it's them making the contributions to the welfare state. They are taking more from it than they're putting in. And you could make the argument is that instead of whatever benefit they are from buying shit at the mall is offset by the benefits that they're receiving from the government. So it doesn't make that much of a difference. So I think that's the most effective argument against this, is that immigrants prove to be more of a burden to the welfare state than a contributor to it. And and also the fact that with greater automation and AI, they're not even be working in the first place. They're all going to be on welfare. And so I had all these people arguing, it's like, oh, you just need to arrest a few employers and they'll all deport. That's what people said should be mass deportation. This is coming from right-wing critics of Trump. And that's all that we need to do. The problem is that a lot of these people just stay here permanently, and they milk the welfare system for all it's worth. And I don't think that's the way to go about things. I think just the argument is that they prove to be a burden on the welfare state. They're not a contributor to it. And relying on them is a poor solution to the problem. Especially when a lot of these jobs are going to be replaced by automation and AI. So that would be my thing. I think the population and older generation thing is a major problem that we're going to have to deal with, even independently of immigration. That's why I'm actually become a huge supporter of entitlement reforms. Is that if we do entitlement reforms, you will solve a lot of the issues that we have with the older generations hoarding all this wealth and living forever, and then sucking up all the wealth and ensuring that all policies are directed towards creating more wealth for themselves. It's like these idiotic arguments that we need to eliminate property tax. I think this is the dumbest fucking idea ever. We complain about boomers having too much wealth, and now we're wanting to give them even more wealth, and at the expense of local infrastructure, which our infrastructure already sucks. So if you want collapsing bridges, no fire department, and all these other things that we already have struggles maintaining, just so boomers can have even more money, then you should be in favor of property tax elimination. I think that's the dumbest idea ever. We all hate taxes. I get it. But I'd rather something to do. The reform needs to be on a national level, dealing with income taxes and making them simpler and easier and fairer. That's all that needs to be done. Property tax, most of the stuff is very simple. Here's how much your car costs. Here's what your tax bill. You pay it. That they may charge too much. That could be an issue, but it's like simple, straightforward. Same with your house or whatever. I think it's income taxes that it becomes convoluted and a pain in the ass, and I think that's really what needs to be changed. But that's a side topic. We got a lot of questions today. Octavius, I'm not quite sure what the question is, but he has something about nihilism. He says, the madman has lost everything but his reason. In a world filled with adversity, one of the coping mechanisms to avoid becoming the madman you've noted some can't handle the red pills is nihilistic thinking. Religion, family, commitment to one's profession as well as nation, and in general focusing on something greater than oneself seems to counter the drag of nihilistic thinking. Do you think modern society is actually that unique in the erosion of these counters? Can a hint of nihilism be healthy at times? Perhaps the motivation from all this adversity can give our lives more meaning than ever. Actually, I take that back. I actually understand this a little bit more. I remember reading it as like, hold on, I need to figure out what is he saying. Okay, we know what he's saying. It is unique to modern societies because generally in older societies, you knew your place for better or for worse. You were there and you lived your life there. Now, in some ways, if you had ambitions to do more than be a peasant, life sucked. You're just a peasant. You're in the village. This is your family. This is who you are. That's it. Your religion, family, and commitment to your land was fully solidified. This is how it was in the old world in Europe. Then you came to America, and it's like a whole new opportunities. And you're not just stuck in your village commune. You're able to do more and to go about things, but that also leaves you with a less of a sense of who you are and where you are, or where you belong. You don't have a clear sense of Heimat, as the Germans would say. So you would have an erosion of these, maybe if you're not successful, if you're successful, it all goes great. You got a family, you've got a nice house, you've got a job, you've got respect. So it doesn't, and you probably even, got a church you go to and family and friends. So that's all fine. But for people who are not successful, you often don't even have those things. I don't know about a hint of nihilism. I'm not quite sure about that, but in terms of modern society is actually unique in the erosion of these counters. Yes, it is, because generally modern society is a lot more nomadic, a lot more giving the opportunities for people to do things that they wouldn't have been able to in the past, which allows for meritocracy, allows for a lot of the advancement and technological progress that we have, but it also comes with the with the downside, you could say, of people not sure who they are and the loss of identity and the type of strong structures that counter nihilism. So I would just say that. I don't know if I don't know if nihilism is healthy at times. I'd have to think about that more. I'm not quite sure about that, but that'd be my answer to that question. Concerned Citizen had a lot of questions. He sent one. I think he is a new person. I should have gotten this for the mailbag, but he sent this. He said, I was asking about, well, he had two questions, and then he sent more questions for the mailbag. So we'll just save those questions for the mailbag. His first question is, your disdain for many of the women in conservative media. Are there any good ones out there? Heather McDonald and Helen Andrews. Maybe Ann Coulter, but Ann Coulter went off the reservation a little bit with her anti-Trump stuff. But she's apparently back on. She was good for, the pre-Trump era. But if I had to ask, it's like Helen Andrews and Heather McDonald. I would say that those are the good women in conservative media. Thoughts on Trump striking the Venezuelan cocaine boat? I think it's cool. I don't know why people are getting upset about it. It's like, this is what we voted for Trump to do. And some people are like, oh, what about due process? This is outrageous. We don't know what these people are. And it's like a lot of right-wing extremists who are about this, and they're getting upset. It goes to the point that, a lot of the cool things that people suggest we do, like mass deportations and other things, and then when we start to do them, people get, weak stomachs over, and they get cold feet. And then they turn against this stuff. But they're all promoting it. And then they try to find ways that it's like the based reason to say that they don't like this. It's that like, oh, mass deportations is pointless because really he shouldn't be rounding up people. He should just be arresting employers and then they'll all self-deport, which, the terror tactics that he's using is driving people to self-deport already. We do have at least 1 million migrants that have disappeared from the country, that have left the country. And that's due to the terror tactics. Anytime they do interviews with these migrants, they're all saying we're thinking about leaving because we don't want to end up in El Salvador. So these are working much more effectively than the employer arrest because we've done employer arrests in the past. And the migrants stayed. And also, if their employer gets arrested, they'll just stay for the welfare benefits. It's not just about work. It's also the benefit, the welfare state that relies on here. But if they think that, that they're going to be personally deported to El Salvador or Sudan or wherever, then they're going to want to leave on their own. And so it works like that. With the Venezuelan cocaine stuff, it's like, all these people were wanting a war on cartels and to bring and to terrify them. And what better way to do that than to strike the cocaine boat? And the cartels are terrified of American power. Some people are like, they'll strike back. I always bring up this example is that when cartels are terrified when there was like these black criminals who were kidnapped because, they were at all rap sheets. They're possibly looking for drugs, and they claimed they were going there for a medical operation. When they got kidnapped by a cartel, the cartel was like, oh shit. They released them, and then they gave to American authorities the men responsible for it. So they're definitely terrified by that. I actually just remembered I had answered the Venezuelan cocaine question on the last or the last mailbag, but there's other developments that we've had. But I'll save his other questions for the mailbag. He's got 3 of them, so we'll wait for them until then. We'll go to Armed Day Enjoyer. Armed Day Enjoyer says, it seems that many on the online right are anti-Trump because they look at the current situation on the ground and place all the blame on Trump, even though the political landscape today is closer to what the alt-right of 2012 would have wanted. The video of Indians in the suburbs shared over the weekend shows much has already been lost, hence making it feel like there's been no victory. Is this an accurate way of putting it? Sort of that is that they're now starting to blame long-term problems on Trump. It's like, apparently these Indian suburbs did not exist up until January 20th, 2025. And then they magically appeared, and then Trump isn't like sending in the Marines to wipe them out. It's like these have been long-term issues that have been going on. And then it's also limited in what he can do about Indians when he's the president. It's like, they're legal migrants or some of them citizens, and they're otherwise not committing crimes. They may be committing crimes. You are limited to what you can do. It's like, it's a matter of keeping those people out. But once they're here legally and, they're not on welfare or anything, it makes it harder to get rid of. And it's been a long time thing. And it's, for some reason, they want to blame Trump. And it's like they're ignoring the past 60 years of immigration history and then just saying that this all suddenly happened under Trump. There's limits to how much he can, it's like black criminal kills someone. Apparently it's personally Trump's responsibility or Trump's at fault. Even though he's let out by its Democratic authorities in Charlotte and North Carolina that allowed this guy to roam free, and these soft on crime policies that allowed him to run free. But apparently it's solely Trump's fault. And then the Indians. It's like apparently Trump was responsible for the 65 Immigration Act and the 1990 Immigration Act and every H-1B that's ever come here. I don't think that's really the case. I think it's that sometimes people are a little bit, there's things that you can criticize Trump on, like the Chinese student visas, the Iran strike, but then people will just try to make up stuff to say that it's all Trump and that Biden was apparently much better on, which I don't really understand. We got another question about Trump. From Ken. Ken's got two questions. He said, how much of the blame for the terrible job market can be laid at Trump's feet? The only thing that really can be blamed for Trump is that I think the tariffs, even though it's something the whole right loves, I think that that's been a contributor to the job market, is that a lot of companies froze hiring in response to the tariffs. Some of them have moved back to hiring as they've gotten a clearer situation in the tariffs, but a lot haven't. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the market due to the tariffs, even if the stock market is doing pretty well, which is hilarious because the tariffs, we all said, would benefit the real economy at the expense of the fake economy, the stock market. But instead, the fake economy is doing really well, but the real economy is not, even though they're both part of the real economy. It's just the economy that a lot of the right-wing online people don't like versus the economy that's supposed to be benefit. They all imagine that there's all going to be these new factories being built and everything, but those aren't really happening due in part to the tariff. So I think that that's part of the terrible job market, but that's not the primary cause. It's also long-term causes that the economy got completely reordered post-COVID with COVID. And then we brought in a lot of, or not that brought in, but then we had this whole job market from COVID and there was a bounce back from it. But there's these long-term effects of what the job market is having, both with the advancement of AI, automation, that is making it a lot of these jobs superfluous, and then we're moving in a different direction with the economy. And so it's a time of economic change, and that is leading to a not so great job market right now. And I don't think Trump is responsible for the AI revolution. Trump's also not responsible for a lot of the things that happened under Biden that has led to the terrible job market. We were beginning to have a terrible job market under Biden in the last 2 years under Biden. And that could have already been seen, but it's now becoming more apparent because some of those job ads were just making up for what happened under COVID with the furloughs and unemployment from there. And then it was just returning to the normal. But now, there's been a stagnation with that, so you haven't had that. Even without the tariffs, we would still have a mediocre job market, in my opinion. So it's a long-term effects that I don't think that Trump's personally responsible for. The one thing that Trump has responsible for, it's something the entire right wanted him to pursue. And maybe long-term, it might have better benefits for the job market once we get a clearer picture and all these trade deals are made, and we might get a thriving job market again. But for this year, it is contributing to the not so good job market that we have. The second question is, we sent another question right now, which you're limited to two. You're limited to two questions for the regular episode. Somebody else forgot this as well, but both questions are similar. So I'm gonna keep it. Reminder: you only get 2 questions for the regular episode. We might start limiting it just to one, but we'll think about that. He asked about my thoughts on RFK. RFK, I think, is fine. I like him personally. I one time met him in an RT green room in Russia Today green room a decade ago. And he's like a big celebrity. You don't have celebrities in there. And he was like really nice, shared family stories, just talked to us like normal people. So I have a lot of respect for him from that. And I also have respect for him that, he could have just had a nice, easy life like the rest of the Kennedys. And instead he took up a very controversial issue that subjected him to a lot of public criticism and his family attacking him, and that's vaccines. Wouldn't say I fully agree with his vaccines take, but I think there's something there. I mean, I agree with him on the COVID vaccine, which was worthless, but all the other ones, I'm not fully sold on it. I'm not sold on it. I think it's like fine. He also helped Trump win by endorsing Trump. It was a big boost to Trump, and so he deserved the cabinet job he got. I don't think some of the moves at HHS are a little concerned by it, even if some of these people are suck and are libtards who are responsible for the COVID hysteria. I think the eliminating all the vaccine mandates is going a little too far. I know that might be libtarded, but that's my opinion on that. But that's more of like Florida moving in that direction. I guess under the influence of RFK. I would share Trump's skepticism on that, but otherwise, I'm fine with RFK. I think Maha also goes a little too far. Some of it just adds a new level of neuroticism. Like we're fully supporting people being healthy and being active and taking care of themselves, but some people take that in a insane direction, and it adds a new level of neuroticism to they're like, what's in my food? I need to see every ingredient. Oh no, I'm gonna die because this is in there, and it's. It just adds a new level of neuroticism to some people. We'll save his other question for the mailbag. We'll go to Werner. Or we're going to say it's Werner rather than Werner. He has two questions. One is a two-parter, but we'll include it in there. He said, Latin American countries recently have seen a plummet of birth rates. American whites in the heartland have a higher TFR than a lot of places in the developing world. What are the social and political implications for the U.S. and the Western Hemisphere going forward? Well, I mean, there's a lot of implications for that. But I think when it happens with America is that the average white, normal whites, are still having kids. They might be having one less kid than their parents did. Like their parents had 3 kids and they're having 2 kids. But they're still having kids and building up a family in a way far more so than Europe. Where in Europe, they're just not having kids, period. There's a much more of a plummet in European white birth rates than there are in American white birth rates. A lot of it is universal. A lot of some of the birth rate decline is coming from MDAs and also Hispanics living here, while whites is staying relatively stable. So that's like a good sign. What are the implications for that is that I don't think we're going to have as much of a population decline, and also the major problems that are going to happen with Europe and Japan and South Korea, where they're going to have the even more lopsided population pyramid, and pretty much they have this version of geriatric socialism. I think America is going to be able to withstand that problem a lot more than Europeans are, especially because, with whites, birth rates are staying stable. That means we have productive citizens who are contributing to the economy and contributing to the welfare state and maintaining it. While in Europe, all their population growth is from these migrants who are just stealing from the welfare state. That's not really going to help them out. I mean, Japan and South Korea don't have that many migrants, so they don't have that burden coming there, but they do have a bigger problem with what to do with all these old people, and the birth rates are even worse than Europe. So I think with Latin American countries having a plummet in birth rates, that we're going to see fewer immigration, which is a positive. I think most of the effects in the Western Hemisphere are generally going to be positive, with fewer migrants coming to America, Latin American countries potentially stabilizing more, which further decreases immigration, and also that America is going to be a lot more stable and be able to withstand the lopsided population pyramid much more so than the rest of the developed world. So those are some of the implications I have in mind. So his two-part question, he said, do you expect Republicans to retain the presidency in 2028? Do you expect Democrats' view on immigration to change by then? Two, I don't know. Generally don't know. Way too early. Way too early to say. Ask me in 2027 on that. There's no way to predict that in 2025. Anyone who's telling you that they can predict it is lying to you. There are so many things up in the air with the economy, with what issues might be having there, what foreign policy crises might be going along. You don't know. You don't know. 2005, like say if in 2005 it was like, will Republicans retain the White House? You could have said, sure, looks good. And then recession happened and the Iraq war went even worse. And it was like unlikely Republicans could have retained the presidency. Look into, in 2013, it looked like Democrats were going to have a permanent political majority and Republicans were doomed. Then Trump won in 2016. And then in 2017, I think most people thought Trump was going to lose in 2017. But in 2019, it looked very good for Trump. And heading into 2020, it looked like he was actually going to stay president. And then COVID happened and a lot of other things happened. And they were able to take the presidency away from him. So it's way too early. I'm not going to make that prediction. Three, now this is something that I can predict. Do you expect Democrats' view on immigration to change by then? I mean, they've already sort of changed. It's similar to crime, is that they're not going to call for abolishing ICE. They're not going to be they're wanting to some degree of immigration enforcement. They're not going to go full on open borders like they did in 2020 because they realize that is what screwed them in 2024. And even the more progressive candidates are going to be to the right. And it's easy to be to the right of what was the Democratic consensus in 2020. Are they going to be genuinely like hawkish on immigration? No. Are they still going to want policies that increase immigration? Yes. What they're going to try to do is that they're going to want to say we need to keep, border security and that we should have sensible immigration policy. There'll probably be ways that they'll restrict ICE, is that they're probably going to promise decreased enforcement, but they're not going to be calling for abolishing ICE like they did in 2020. They're not going to be calling for tearing down the borders. A lot of the ways is the stuff that Trump's been doing on the border, they're going to keep. They're just not going to draw as much attention to that. In 2020, they're like, we need to tear down every single border wall and basically abolish border patrol. And even when Biden's first amnesty bill that he proposed when he got in the White House in 2021 was effectively, we're legalizing every single illegal alien here and we're doing nothing to increase border security. We establish an official open border policy. They're not going to go that far. And I don't think they're going to be championing amnesty in the same way that they did in 2020. They're more just going to say that we're going to have a humane policy, that we're not going to have ICE kidnapping. Some of that will return to, it'll be anti-ICE, pro-border security, if that makes sense. And they're going to benefit a lot. I mean, I think illegal immigration in terms of high numbers of migrants coming to this country is not going to be a major factor, because I think the rates of illegal immigrants coming to this country probably will, I think, somewhat increase from right now we're having historic lows that we haven't seen in years, or we've never seen, to be honest. And they're pretty much all getting deported. You might start having an uptick where we're getting 30,000 migrants a month, but Trump would love to deport them because that means that they can increase their deportation figures. So pretty much very few of the illegal, we're going to have pretty much no new illegal migrants to this country over the next 4 years for those factors. But I think Democrats are going to want to keep that because it benefits them to not have this as an issue for American public, but they're going to try to figure out ways to increase legal immigration and to counter fascist ICE. I think that'll be their views on immigration. All right. We now got a question from Costco Frank. He said, do you see Trump standing more firm on cutting Indian H-1Bs and AIT workers compared to his attitude on student visas for China? I'm detecting a collapse in whatever goodwill the Indian community had with the general public, so perhaps something big could be in the works. I think so, because I think, a lot of the internet impacts this Trump administration. And they know that there's a lot more hostility on the internet towards Indians than there are to Chinese. And I think he's getting annoyed of Modi. I don't think he likes the way that Modi's negotiating. I think he's getting along a lot better with the Chinese negotiators, which is why he's more open to the Chinese student visas. But with the Indians, he's seemingly turning against them. I don't think he likes some of the moves that India's not following along with our plans for them, with dealing with Russia and all other countries. And a lot of his advisors telling him like, hey, our base really hates Indians, and you do not want to be seen as rewarding Indians. And also, it's probably telling him, is like, who else likes Indians? Elon Musk, who called you a pedophile. So I think that there's a different attitude towards the Indians as towards the Chinese. I mean, they've already started to restrict H-1Bs by creating higher standards for obtaining them and IT workers, and also there is a demand decreasing for their IT workers due to a lot of that work being taken up by AI. So I think that, and from what I understand, is that tech companies are not lobbying Trump as hard on this as you would have thought maybe at the beginning of this term. So I think, yes, I think that there's more of a chance of him cutting Indian H-1Bs and Indian immigration compared to his attitude towards student visas for those factors. He likes responding to his base, and a lot of his advisors are very online, and they recognize that there's a lot of Indian hate online, which might be, maybe not reflect the man on the street, but it does reflect something. It does reflect the base. So let's see who else we got. We got a question from Dollar Bill. Dollar Bill asks, on Friday, President Trump signed an executive order restoring the original name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War. Speaking about this decision, he said, we won the First World War, the Second World War, and then we went woke and changed the name to the Department of Defense. Was this the earliest woke action of the American government? No. Probably the, FEPC or these employment policies that were trying to, early measures of affirmative action that the Roosevelt and Truman administration pushed forward, and also hiring a lot of communists in government would have been that. These are one of the things I just don't care about, him changing the Department of War. It's not something I oppose. It's just something I don't care about. I don't really care if it's called Department of Defense or Department of War. I've grown up calling it Department of Defense, so I'm going to keep calling it DOD, DOW. I guess it's something interesting, but a lot of them had similar words to using European governments use stuff that was similar to defense. So, but do I oppose it? No. It's just something I don't really care about. I guess you could say it was woke. We try to make it nicer sounding, but maybe it was the fact that it was in the Cold War and that we we're bringing along our Secretary of War, and maybe some countries, not clear about the diplomacy of that would have been like, maybe that's a concern. We just switched it to Department of Defense for diplomatic reasons. I'm not that fully versed on the history of it, but I don't really care either way. That's my opinion. So it's fine, but I'm not going to criticize him for it. It's whatever. He asked a question about your IQ something on Hurricane Katrina. Made an interesting observation that the blacks in cities like New Orleans, Memphis, and St. Louis along the Mississippi River are infamous for being especially violent and disorderly. Do you think this has anything to do with the phrase sold down the river, where the most unruly and disobedient slaves from the southeastern states would be shipped to plantations along the Mississippi? This is speculation on my part, but it's possible that blacks who ended up there were selected over time by evolution to be especially violent. I'm not quite sure, but it was general punishment to send them further into the deep south, and it also meant that there were fewer chances of escaping. Is that a lot of times if they caught escaped slaves, they would send them to Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. And it was also where a lot of the slave economy was starting to be much more centered, is that it wasn't as, some of the coastal states were it was still important to them, but not as important to the deep south states. And also was where they were having black majority population, so they were needing this, and they weren't importing more slaves, so they were desperate to have the upper south states send the slaves down there. I think there's something to it. I think it's just also the fact that these became black majority cities, and that type of environment shaped those cities and the type of communities that were there, and so that they became especially violent. You could also see this in somewhere like Baltimore, where it's like, oh, that's like an especially violent area, and so you have a particular type of local that would come from there. So maybe in some ways, but there could be something to that. But I think it's just also that it's a majority black cities. St. Louis might not be. Hold on. I'm actually going to double check if St. Louis is. It's black plurality. Well, it's like about equal between the white and black population. So it's not a black majority city. I think it's just a particular fact. But I mean, the real crime is the East St. Louis, which is, black majority. Same with like Pine Bluff and Jackson. So some of those cities are just there. I think there's some point of it, but I'd have to think about it more to offer a better reason why than that. But there could be something to that. So I don't think we got a question from New England Refugee. Or no, we did. No, he did. He sent one. He said, do you have any predictions for what Congress will do with the upcoming September funding deadline? Will conservatives vote to shut down the government, or will a long-term funding bill pass like the Senate wants? Or something in the middle? Will be something in the middle. They can't get any type of budget through, and I think a lot of Republicans are conservatives are miffed about the big, beautiful bill, and so they're going to want to have a fight on this. What they're going to have is a temporary funding bill, like they always do. Most likely scenario. It's what they've been doing ever since I've been observing. For as long as I've been involved in politics, this is what Congress has been doing. They can't get a long-term funding bill unless they had an overwhelming majority in the Senate and the House, and was able to pressure these conservatives into doing as they want. I mean, unless Trump wants to spend his political capital to force the conservatives to get behind a long-term funding bill. But I don't know. Trump's got a lot of other things going on. They'll probably just pass a temporary stopgap measure like they always do. So that's my answer to that. And now we're going to conclude with LK Rurik. If I did not get to your questions on today, just remind me and I'll get them for the mailbag. He's got a question. He's saying, a lot of libtard international politicking is headed by NGOs. Should the right teach them to can play at that game? Why not have the MAGA White House establish their own to oppose immigration and censorship in other Western countries, or to agitate for the interests of Afrikaners? These are causes I would be willing and ecstatic for my taxpayer dollars to go to. There are apparently measures to do that as we speak. They're trying to set something up like this and to take over NGOs to support right-wing efforts. And even a lot of what the State Department is doing now is it's supporting nationalist parties in Europe. I mean, the AFD, despite the AFD wanting to be independent from American power, the State Department is now favoring it. And the State Department is favoring a lot of other nationalist parties, and saying these are the parties we favor and who we support. So there is incremental change in that direction into creating a type of right-wing international NGO network that would support nationalists throughout the Western world and to help agitate for the interests of Afrikaners. And I think the MAGA White House is certainly moving into that direction far more than they did in the first term. So I fully support it, and there are efforts to do so. Second, will you ever do an IQ supplement on Gamergate? Alam Bukhari is apparently working on a book about Gamergate. I'm not sure when that book will come out. It might be late next year. It might be early 2027. So it'll be a while till we do one on Gamergate. I was not, even at that time, I'm still not fully aware of the ins and outs of Gamergate, so I need to read a book about it. And I know Alam Bukhari was one of the main reporters on Gamergate at the time, and his book should give incredible detail about it. So I would be able to do an IQ supplement on it when that book comes out. So I'd have to wait for that book to come out to do that, because otherwise I'm not as knowledgeable about the subject as I know about Zoe Quinn. I know about I think it was an Armenian one, or Sarkeesian, and some of these other people who are involved in the matter, but I was never really fully versed in it in the way I was with like the alt-right and all the alt-right's various escapades over the 2010s. So yes, I will do an IQ sum on Gamergate when that book comes out, but it might be you might have to wait a while for it. So that is my answer to that, and that is highly respected today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. We're going to have more great content coming up this week, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.